125 tariff increase on goods that are coming into the U.S. from China. President Donald Trump of the U.S. has done it again, and he has continued to insist that China must surrender to the U.S. and not disrespect the U.S. by taking them to the World Trade Organization or retaliating. My people, I want my host to help you understand what is happening, because this matter is not something that you should ignore. I brought in my host once again to help us understand what is actually going on, what is happening between the U.S. and China, and who is going to suffer most from this trade war going on. So without much ado, let me welcome to my host. We'll take you deeper into this conversation from what is trending. Please, if you haven't subscribed to this channel, do so right.
Keeping up with international trade these days, it really feels like trying to catch smoke.
Doesn't it?
Just when you think you've got a handle on things.
Yeah.
The whole landscape shifts.
Yeah.
And right now, the spotlight is definitely on a really fascinating turn of events between the U.S. and China.
Absolutely. It's moving fast.
We're about to really dig into the latest tariff moves from the U.S. It's a mix, right? It's a surprising step back in some ways, but also a significant ramp up in others.
That's a good way to put it, a real mix.
So based on the reports you shared,
yeah,
our goal today is to kind of get beyond the headlines, understand the specifics, what these announcements really mean or might mean moving forward.
Precisely. It's a very fluid situation. And like you said, the immediate market reactions we saw, plus all the existing tensions, it makes for a complex picture.
Yeah.
These sources, they give us a pretty valuable, real-time look into how this is all evolving. So our mission for this deep dive is clear. Understand the details of these tariff announcements, the reasons given, and the initial reactions they picked off.
Okay, so let's dive right in. The catalyst for a lot of this seems to be that pretty attention-grabbing announcement on Truth Social.
Right. The platform itself was noteworthy for this kind of policy news.
MSNBC reported it declared an immediate tariff increase on goods from China. And get this, the first report said 125%.
Yeah, a staggering number. And the justification given, according to that post, was China's lack of respect shown to the world markets.
Strong words.
Very strong. And also saying that ripping off the USA and other countries is no longer sustainable or acceptable, really framing it quite directly.
Absolutely. But here's where it gets, really interesting. The same post also announced a 90-day pause on tariffs for a bunch of other countries.
Right, alongside that substantially lowered reciprocal tariff of 10% during the pause.
And this was apparently linked to outreach from, over 75 countries looking for trade talks?
That's what the post claimed, yeah. Over 75.
But the catch, the condition for this pause.
Yeah.
No retaliation from those countries.
Exactly. No retaliation. That's the key condition. It feels very specific, doesn't it?
It really does, like setting the terms up front.
And if you think about the wider implications, maybe it's a strategic move, trying to perhaps isolate China while offering this temporary window to many others.
Temporary olive branch, maybe?
Possibly. And that non-retaliation part is crucial, sets the ground rules. And reciprocal tariff implies those countries also drop theirs on U.S. goods to 10%.
Okay, right. So how did this land on Capitol Hill and in the markets? Let's stick with that MSNBC report for a second.
Well, there is apparently considerable angst on the Hill.
Angst? About what specifically?
About the process, mainly. How these tariffs are delivered, the announcement method.
Ah, the Truth Social factor again.
Seems like it. And while Republicans were publicly giving the president time, backing him up, privately, the report says they were getting worried calls from constituents, small business owners, people concerned about their 401ks.
That makes sense. Hits home for a lot of people.
Yeah, and apparently the volume of those concerns reaching the White House was increasing, so pressure building internally.
Right, pressure for maybe a clearer path forward.
Exactly, because the other thing MSNBC noted was how unpredictable it all feels. The phrase was something like, opportunity to shift on a dime.
Which, this announcement itself kind of proves that point, doesn't it?
It really does. And interestingly, the initial market reaction to the post, potentially positive.
Yeah, I hope so.
Some suggestion that markets might go back into green territory, which just shows how sensitive they are to these signals.
Wow. A single post moving markets like that.
It's fascinating, right? The power of these announcements, but also the instability it can create.
And that lack of a specific long-term strategy with an end game,
Yeah.
that's what really worried congressional Republicans, according to the report.
Yes, they want a clearer vision. Where is this all headed?
There was even that quote from a senator, wasn't there, about one Truth Social post-moving markets. Really highlights how unconventional this is.
It does, and the core concern seems to be this feeling of shooting from the hip.
Right. Without a clear strategy for long-term economic benefit. That seems to be the main source of unease.
Exactly. Now, let's shift to the economic analysis, also from MSNBC. We saw the Dow jump significantly, didn't we?
Yeah, like 6%, broke 40,000. That's huge.
Huge jump. But context is key here, right? It came after a market downturn.
Okay, so maybe seen as a potential turning point.
That seems to be the interpretation, that the president is giving a break to those 75 countries for 90 days.
While cranking up the pressure on China.
Precisely. And the reason given, again, China's lack of respect to the world's markets.
And the markets like this.
Well, the positive reaction suggests investors maybe dislike a broad trade war more. They seem to prefer this more focused approach, at least initially.
That makes sense. Relief, perhaps, that it wasn't escalating everywhere at once.
That could be it. Relief that it's contained, somewhat. But, it's an immediate reaction, long-term viability. Depends on what happens next.
Right. Okay, let's get the White House perspective. We've got info from both MSNBC and Global News here.
And the narrative seems to be one of an extraordinary reversal.
Reversal? How?
Because apparently the president had indicated no such pause was coming previously.
Okay, so pressure from markets, Republicans, it maybe worked.
Seems like it played a role, and the focus now, according to these reports, is much more squarely on China, portrayed as the worst offender in unfair trade.
And what about those other countries, the 70 plus?
The idea mentioned is tailor-made deals, suggests bilateral talks, not one big agreement.
Okay, and the White House stance on China during this period?
MSNBC reported they would not prioritize negotiations with China right now.
So put them on the back burner for 90 days.
Seems like it. And Global News added more texture here. They conveyed the message that China made a mistake by retaliating before.
A mistake. Interesting framing.
Yeah, and that the president believes China actually wants and needs a deal.
But doesn't know how to start.
Doesn't know how to initiate, exactly. That's the message reported.
Wow. Okay. And this explains the tariff hike.
It seems directly linked. Global News quoted the White House saying, "When America is punched, he punches back harder," explaining those 104% tariffs.
Okay, 104%. We'll come back to the percentage discrepancy later.
Right. But there's also this other layer. The White House apparently said the president would be incredibly gracious if China makes the first move.
So, tough talk, but leaving the door slightly ajar.
A bit of diplomatic maneuvering in the mix, it seems.
And the underlying reason for all these tariffs? Global News mentioned it again.
Reshoring manufacturing. Yeah. Rebuilding America's industrial base. That's the stated long-term goal.
Right, that's been a consistent theme. But the big question is this approach, these tariffs, these pauses, is it enough to actually achieve that?
That is the multi-billion-dollar question, isn't it? Tariffs create price pressure? Sure. Might make some companies rethink where they produce things?
But it's not that simple, is it?
Not at all. Global supply chains are incredibly complex. Manufacturing decisions involve way more than just tariffs. You need infrastructure, skilled workers.
A much bigger strategy.
Arguably, yes. Tariffs alone are unlikely to be the whole answer for massive reshoring.
And all this chopping and changing, it creates so much uncertainty. Both reports highlighted that.
Absolutely. Businesses hate uncertainty. It makes planning, investing, really difficult when the rules can just change overnight.
Yeah, predictability is key for them.
Generally, yes. These sudden shifts can definitely make businesses more cautious.
Okay, let's drill down into the tariff details now. Percentages, scope, using CBC News and the other reports. We hit this already, but that discrepancy.
Right. MSNBC initially said 125% for China, based on the Truth Social post, but CBC and Global News later mentioned 104%.
So what do we make of that?
It's hard to say definitively. Could be an initial reporting error, maybe a clarification later. The key point is, whether it's 104 or 125, it's a massive increase.
Massive, yeah. And the timing. When did these actually kick in?
CBC and Global News said shortly after midnight on Tuesday.
Okay. MSNBC's report was Wednesday, implying it was immediate after the post, but less specific on the exact hour. So slight timeline differences, too.
Minor differences, yeah. What's consistent is why. It was a direct response to China's counter tariffs.
Tit for tat.
Exactly, that cycle of retaliation. And CBC noted China's stance, rejecting blackmail, vowing to fight to the end.
Doesn't sound like they're backing down easily.
No, suggests this could be a prolonged standoff.
And what about the tariffs on other countries, the ones not paused?
CBC detailed that country-specific tariffs up to 50% were still set to take effect as planned.
Okay, so that context makes the temporary 10% for the paused countries seem, well, less generous.
That's a really important nuance. As one MSNBC commentator pointed out, 10% is still higher than pre-existing levels for many of these nations.
Right, so it's a reduction from the threatened higher levels, but not a return to the old status quo.
Exactly. It still represents a generally more protectionist stance, even with the pause.
Okay, now let's talk about the concerns and the skepticism. What are people worried about here? MSNBC and CBC both touched on this.
Well, big picture worries. Fears of recession, fears of really upending the whole global trading system.
Serious stuff.
Yeah. There was also mention of instructions to prioritize talks with allies like Japan and Korea first.
Strategic focus there. But what about the other 70 or so countries?
That's where the uncertainty lies. No specific timeline reported for talks with them.
And CBC reported the president is not doing exemptions or exceptions in the near term.
Which sounds like a pretty firm line going into any talks. Maybe not much flexibility initially.
And what about the impact on regular people? Consumers?
That Reuters Ipsos poll cited by CBC showed Americans widely expect prices to go up.
Makes sense. Tariffs are basically taxes on imports, right?
Essentially, yes. Businesses often pass those costs along, which means potentially higher prices for consumers, hitting inflation spending.
And we saw some real-world examples, business reactions.
We did. Micron, the chip maker, adding surcharges, retailers delaying orders, holding off on hiring.
Because of cost fears, uncertainty.
Both, seems like.
Okay.
And that example of running shoes from Vietnam, potentially a big price jump, that really brings it home.
Yeah, everyday items. There was even that anecdote about people stocking up.
Stocking up on goods, worried about future price hikes, shows real consumer concern.
Okay, finally, let's talk about the skepticism around the process itself. Negotiating with 70 countries in 90 days.
Yeah, MSNBC highlighted serious doubts about the feasibility of that, especially productively.
Why the doubt? Just the sheer number.
The number, the tight time frame, but also the apparent lack of clearly defined U.S. goals beyond just the tariff numbers.
What do you mean?
Well, the report mentioned the initial tariffs were set using crude arithmetic. There wasn't a specific list cited of what the U.S. wants changed on, say, non-tariff barriers, taxes, regulations, those complex issues.
So it's not clear what the specific asks are for each country.
Exactly,
Yeah.
which makes deep, effective negotiations really difficult, especially across 70 countries in 90 days. It sounds like a monumental task.
It really does. Okay, so let's try to wrap this up. Bring it all together.
Okay.
We've seen this big hike in tariffs on China. At the same time, a 90-day pause and a tariff reduction to 10% for over 70 other countries.
Contingent on them not hitting back.
Right, crucial condition, the initial market reaction,
Yeah.
somewhat positive, maybe relief. It wasn't a wider fight immediately.
But huge uncertainty remains about the long-term strategy, the end game, and the potential impacts on businesses and ultimately on consumers. That's come through really clearly in the sources.
Yeah, that uncertainty is the dominant theme, isn't it?
It really is. These rapid policy shifts, the slightly different details reported, the mixed reactions, it all paints a picture of a very dynamic, maybe unpredictable situation.
And the stated reasons, fixing unfair trade, bringing manufacturing back, those are big goals.
Huge goals. But whether this specific approach, with all its moving parts, is the most effective way to achieve them, oh, that remains the big question.
Which kind of leads us to a final thought for everyone listening. Given these fast changes, the reasons stated, all the complexities we've just talked about, what might actually be the ultimate goal here? What's the grand strategy, if there is one? And maybe just as important, what unintended consequences could pop up from this particular way of handling global trade?
Yeah, that's the stuff to really mull over. It's a complex web, definitely. Understanding all the different angles, the potential ripple effects, that's going to be key as this whole thing keeps developing.